You tampered with the IV. Give it to me now.
You can't prove anything, doctor.
That's enough! No one leaves!
Ma'am, you're under arrest. Hands behind your back.
No, this is a mistake.
Officer, please, she's innocent.
For your crimes, I sentence you to 10 years.
No, please, no, not back.
In the restless city of Packet stood the towering Missy Crest Medical Center, a hospital so vast it looked less like a building and more like a kingdom of white walls and blinking machines, 7 floors stretching toward the sky, 200 beds filled with fragile lives, and corridors that never truly slept. During the day it bustled with hope, prayers, and hurried footsteps, but at night, especially after midnight, a strange heaviness settled over the wards like an invisible fog, because for 6 terrifying months something impossible had been happening. Patients were dying, not randomly, not gradually, but precisely at 3 a.m., not a minute earlier, not a second later, as if death itself had set an alarm. 12 patients had died in half a year, always on the night shift, always in different wards, and always at that cursed hour, and panic spread like wildfire through the city as grieving families gathered at the hospital gates shouting about witchcraft, curses, and sacrifices. While the hospital director, Dr. Benson O'Curie, stood before cameras wiping sweat from his round face and repeating the same rehearsed speech about natural causes and critical conditions, though deep inside even he felt the chill of doubt because the pattern was too perfect, too mechanical, too deliberate. Nurses whispered in corners, doctors avoided eye contact, and some staff refused to work nights altogether, yet amid the fear one name continued to shine like a star in the darkness: nurse Zainab, the most admired nurse in the hospital, known for her spotless uniform, her calming smile, and her gentle hands that comforted the dying and reassured the frightened, a woman patients described as heaven-sent, an angel in human form, the kind who prayed beside bedsides and stayed beyond her shift without complaint. And because she was always present during emergencies, no one questioned her dedication, no one doubted her compassion, no one imagined that behind that serene face there could be something darker. However, in the shadows of the hospital, a young security guard named Dinladi had begun to notice a coincidence that felt too sharp to ignore. Every single time a patient died at 3 a.m., Nurse Zainab had been on duty in that ward, and though he was only a guard and his words carried little weight, his instincts refused to stay silent, and as he reviewed shift logs night after night, the pattern carved itself into his mind like a warning sign flashing red in the dark, and somewhere within the silent walls of Missy Crest Medical Center, the clock was already ticking toward another 3 a.m. Nurse Zainab moved through the hospital corridors with effortless grace, her white uniform glowing under fluorescent lights, her voice soft as a lullaby and her smile warm enough to calm even the most frightened patient, and for 8 years she had built a reputation that seemed untouchable. Doctors praised her efficiency, patients blessed her name, and families often requested her specifically because she treated strangers like relatives, holding trembling hands, whispering prayers, and adjusting pillows with maternal tenderness, and when she laughed the tension in a room dissolved instantly. She knew every protocol, every emergency response, every medication dosage, and she performed CPR with such intensity that colleagues often said if effort alone could defeat death, Zainab would never lose a patient. Yet beneath the surface of this perfection something subtle and unsettling existed. On certain nights she behaved differently, disappearing into the medication room between 2:30 and 2:45 a.m. for exactly 15 minutes before emerging calm and composed, carrying her tray toward one specific patient as if guided by fate itself, and moments later at precisely 3 a.m., chaos would erupt as monitors screamed and hearts flatlined, and Zainab would cry out dramatically for doctors, throwing herself into resuscitation attempts with convincing desperation, tears streaming down her cheeks as colleagues praised her devotion, never realizing that the performance might be part of a carefully choreographed ritual. Meanwhile Dinladi, watching from hallways and reviewing duty logs in the dim security office, felt his suspicion growing heavier with every passing week, and though he dared to approach Dr. O'Curie once with his concerns, he was dismissed harshly and warned never to slander the hospital's finest nurse again, leaving him humiliated but not convinced, because the pattern was undeniable and coincidence had begun to look like calculation. Still, Zainab's public image remained flawless, and even the new transfer, Dr. Aminat Lal, who arrived from Lagos full of sharp questions and keen observation, initially found herself charmed by Zainab's welcoming demeanor, unaware that behind the kindness lay a secret waiting for the perfect moment to surface. And as the hospital prepared for another long night shift, the angel everyone trusted continued her rounds, knowing exactly what the clock would soon announce. Dr. Aminat Lal had always trusted her instincts, and from her very first week at Missy Crest Medical Center she sensed that beneath the hospital's polished reputation something fragile and dangerous was cracking, yet she said nothing at first because evidence in medicine must outweigh emotion. However, the night she was assigned to work alongside Nurse Zainab would change everything, because as the ward settled into its midnight silence and machines hummed softly like mechanical lullabies, Aminat noticed Zainab giving unusual attention to an elderly patient in bed 7, Papa Giddy, a mild pneumonia case recovering steadily with stable vitals and no sign of deterioration, yet Zainab hovered near him with an intensity masked as affection, adjusting his blanket repeatedly, whispering prayers, and smiling at him with an almost sentimental glow while explaining to Aminat that elderly patients reminded her of her late father, a statement that sounded tender but felt rehearsed. The ward clock ticked steadily toward 2:30 a.m., and as if guided by ritual rather than routine, Zainab excused herself politely to prepare the 3 a.m. medications, disappearing into the medication room for exactly 15 minutes, locking the door behind her. And though Aminat pretended to review digital files at the nurse's station, her eyes never left that closed door, counting each passing second as her heartbeat matched the ticking clock. When Zainab emerged carrying her tray, her expression was serene, almost glowing, and she walked directly to Papa Giddy's bed where Aminat watched discreetly as she adjusted the 4-line and injected something into the drip port with fluid precision before whispering what appeared to be a prayer into the sleeping man's ear. Then walking away calmly as if nothing unusual had occurred. At 2:55 a.m. Papa Giddy's monitor displayed perfectly stable readings, and Aminat felt foolish for doubting a colleague until 2:58 a.m. when subtle irregularities began to flicker across the screen like a storm gathering on the horizon, and by 2:59 a.m. his breathing grew shallow and strained, causing Aminat's medical instincts to flare violently as adrenaline rushed through her veins. Then, as if obeying a cruel script, the monitor flatlined at exactly 3 a.m., the piercing tones slicing through the ward like a blade, and Zainab rushed in theatrically, shouting for help and performing chest compressions with convincing desperation while Aminat administered emergency medication, yet despite their efforts the old man's heart refused to return, and within minutes Papa Giddy was declared dead, another name to be added to the growing list of unexplained 3 a.m. casualties, while Zainab wept dramatically. Collapsing into a chair as if grieving a personal loss, Aminat stood frozen, replaying every second in her mind, the 15-minute disappearance, the injection, the exact timing, and a chilling realization crept into her thoughts like cold water down her spine. After the family had been informed and the ward returned to uneasy quiet, Aminat sought out Dinladi beneath the mango tree in the hospital compound where night insects buzzed in the humid air, and when she asked him how many had died at precisely 3 a.m., his answer confirmed her worst fear: 12 in 6 months, every single one during Zainab's shift. The coincidence had now transformed into a pattern too precise to ignore, and though accusing the hospital's most beloved nurse could destroy reputations and careers, Aminat knew silence would cost more lives, so under the dim glow of the courtyard lights she and Dinladi formed a dangerous alliance, agreeing to gather undeniable proof before confronting anyone, because if Zainab was innocent their careers would be ruined, but if she was guilty then a killer was hiding behind a halo, and somewhere inside the hospital walls the clock was already ticking toward another deadly 3 a.m. 3 nights after Papa Giddy's death, tension inside Missy Crest Medical Center felt heavier than the humid midnight air, because Dr. Aminat and Dinladi were no longer guided by suspicion alone but by strategy, and they knew the next move had to be calculated with precision if they were to expose the truth without destroying their own futures. After much hesitation, Aminat approached Dr. Ibrahim, the respected head of surgery, a man known for logic over emotion, and though he initially dismissed the idea that Nurse Zainab could be responsible for anything sinister, the pattern of 12 deaths at exactly 3 a.m. forced him into uneasy silence, and reluctantly he agreed to help them set a trap, not out of certainty but because the numbers refused to lie. That night Zainab was scheduled again for the night shift, and Aminat volunteered to work beside her while Dinladi monitored the security system, and with Dr. Ibrahim's quiet approval they installed a small hidden camera inside the medication room, an action that technically violated hospital policy but was justified by the possibility of saving a life. When Zainab arrived at 10 p.m., she greeted everyone with her usual warmth, her smile radiant, her tone calm, completely unaware that the web was slowly tightening around her, and the hours passed in deceptive normalcy as patients slept peacefully and monitors blinked rhythmically in the dim ward lighting. Yet Aminat noticed something that made her blood run cold as Zainab was paying close attention to a young mother in bed 12, named Blessing, a healthy 28-year-old woman recovering smoothly after giving birth to twins 2 days earlier, a patient with no complications and no reason to decline. And the thought that this vibrant mother might become the next 3 a.m. statistic filled Aminat with dread. At exactly 2:30 a.m., like a ritual repeated too many times, Zainab excused herself and entered the medication room, locking the door behind her, and in the security control room Dinladi switched to the hidden camera feed, his hands trembling as he pressed record. What appeared on the screen froze his breath. Zainab walked calmly to her personal locker, removed a small black pouch from inside, and carefully withdrew a vial containing a clear, colorless liquid that was unmistakably not part of standard hospital inventory. Then, with deliberate steadiness, she filled a syringe, injected the mysterious substance into a saline drip bag, gently shook it to mix the solution, and concealed the vial back in her locker before emerging with her angelic composure intact. Dinladi immediately texted Aminat, "She put something in the drip. Stop her," and Aminat felt her pulse hammering against her ribs as Zainab approached Blessing's bed, carrying the altered drip as if it were harmless medicine, her steps graceful, her face serene. Aminat knew she had to act at the precise moment, too early and Zainab could deny intent. Too late and Blessing's life would be lost, so she waited, her muscles tense, watching as Zainab began disconnecting the existing 4-line to replace it with the poisoned one, and just as the new drip was seconds from flowing into the young mother's veins, Aminat lunged forward shouting, "Step away from that patient now," causing Zainab to recoil in shock, her calm mask flickering for the first time. When Aminat demanded to know what had been added to the drip and insisted it be tested in the lab, Zainab's expression shifted completely, her gentle eyes turning icy, her smile vanishing as though it had never existed, and in a sudden desperate movement she grabbed the drip bag and attempted to flee, but Dr. Ibrahim and 2 security guards rushed in, blocking every exit, trapping her within the ward's harsh fluorescent light. Cornered and breathing heavily, Zainab began to laugh, not the soft melodic laugh everyone adored, but a chilling, distorted sound that echoed against the tiled walls like something unhuman. And as nurses and patients stared in horror, the carefully crafted image of Missy Crest's beloved angel shattered in a single terrifying moment, revealing something far darker beneath the uniform. The ward fell into suffocating silence as Nurse Zainab stood trapped between Dr. Ibrahim, the security guards, and the unblinking fluorescent lights above, her laughter echoing unnaturally through the corridor while patients watched in confusion and terror, and for the first time since anyone had known her, the softness drained completely from her face, replaced by something sharp and venomous that seemed to have been hiding beneath her skin for years. Dr. Aminat, her voice trembling yet firm, demanded to know what was inside the drip bag, and after a long pause Zainab lifted her chin with eerie pride and answered in a calm, almost satisfied tone, "Poison," a single word that sliced through the room like broken glass, followed by a confession that stunned everyone present. She admitted she had been killing patients for 6 months, always at exactly 3 a.m., always during her shift, choosing victims carefully so that their deaths would appear natural, and she described how she used high concentrations of potassium chloride, a substance capable of stopping the heart almost instantly and difficult to detect unless specifically tested for, injecting it into 4 lines moments before the clock struck 3, then performing dramatic resuscitation attempts to conceal her crime. Chaos erupted as nurses gasped, some breaking into tears, while Blessing, the young mother whose life had nearly ended, was quickly moved away for protection, and Dr. Ibrahim stared at Zainab with disbelief, asking the question that trembled in every heart, "Why?" And Zainab's answer poured out not as remorse, but as rage, as she revealed that 15 years earlier her younger sister had died in the same hospital during what should have been a simple appendix surgery, a mistake she believed resulted from negligence. And in her grief she had sworn revenge against the institution that had taken her only sibling. She explained how she trained as a nurse with a singular purpose, to infiltrate the very system she blamed, and how she chose 3 a.m. because that was the exact time her sister's heart stopped, turning the hour into her personal ritual of vengeance, an eye for an eye twisted into a serial pattern of murder, and though her voice cracked with emotion, there was no apology in her words, only cold justification, as if she believed 12 innocent lives were acceptable payment for one tragic loss. When police sirens wailed outside moments later, officers entered swiftly, handcuffing her wrists as she continued laughing, claiming she had already won because the hospital had suffered as she once suffered, yet the reality of her confession hung heavily in the air like smoke after a fire, and as investigators secured the poison drip and confiscated the vial from her locker, the magnitude of her deception became horrifyingly clear. The angel who prayed beside beds had orchestrated precise executions behind closed doors, laboratory tests soon confirmed the presence of potassium chloride in the drip bag, and when authorities exhumed the bodies of the previous 12 victims, traces of the same substance were discovered, validating every suspicion Dinladi had carried silently for months. Families of the deceased were notified, and their grief reignited with fury upon learning that the nurse they had thanked for compassion was responsible for their loved ones' deaths, while the hospital staff grappled with betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. As Zainab was escorted away under flashing lights, her once spotless white uniform now marked by disgrace, she turned once more toward the ward and whispered, almost tenderly, 3 a.m. is sacred, before disappearing into the police vehicle, leaving behind a hospital shaken to its core and a truth too dark to ignore. That sometimes revenge disguises itself as righteousness, and sometimes evil hides behind the brightest smile. The arrest of Nurse Zainab sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of Missy Crest Medical Center, turning the once respected hospital into the center of national headlines and public outrage, as news stations replayed footage of the handcuffed nurse whose angelic reputation had concealed a calculated reign of terror, and families of the 12 victims gathered outside demanding answers, justice, and accountability. Forensic investigations confirmed that each victim had lethal levels of potassium chloride in their bloodstream, administered in doses precise enough to stop the heart within minutes yet subtle enough to mimic sudden cardiac failure, and authorities uncovered the illegal supply chain through which Zainab had obtained the substance from a corrupt pharmacist who was swiftly arrested. While inside the hospital, Dr. Benson O'Keefe faced cameras again, this time without rehearsed confidence, admitting that warnings had been ignored and promising sweeping reforms to ensure such a betrayal could never happen again. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched cases in the region, and in court Zainab showed little remorse, listening coldly as prosecutors described how she manipulated trust, exploited medical knowledge, and weaponized compassion, while defense lawyers attempted to paint her as a broken woman driven by unresolved trauma over her sister's surgical death 15 years earlier. Yet the jury saw beyond the grief to the deliberate planning, the ritualistic timing, and the repeated choice to harm the innocent. And when the judge delivered a life sentence for 12 counts of murder, the courtroom filled with a mix of tears and silence, as if even justice itself felt heavy. For a brief moment, as she was led away, Zainab's expression flickered, not with madness, but with something resembling the weight of realization, before the steel doors closed behind her, sealing her fate. Meanwhile, the hospital underwent transformation, installing surveillance cameras in medication rooms, implementing double verification systems for preparation, and creating a new patient safety department led by Dr. Aminat, whose courage had prevented Blessing and countless future patients from becoming victims. While Dinladi was promoted to chief security officer, his once dismissed intuition now recognized as life-saving vigilance. Blessing, the young mother who had narrowly escaped death, named one of her twin daughters Aminat in gratitude, a living reminder that bravery can interrupt evil's script. And though the hospital slowly rebuilt its reputation, the memory of the 3 a.m. deaths lingered like a scar, a lesson etched into every staff member's conscience that trust must be protected, questions must be heard regardless of rank, and grief left unchecked can mutate into destruction. As elders often say, bitterness is a fire that promises warmth but burns the hands that hold it, and Zainab's quest for revenge did not resurrect her sister nor heal her pain, it only multiplied suffering, proving that justice cannot be born from vengeance and that even the brightest uniform cannot hide a darkened heart forever. Long after the headlines faded, the clock in the hospital lobby continued ticking past 3 a.m. each night without incident, its steady rhythm a quiet symbol that time had reclaimed its innocence. Yet for those who remembered, that hour would always whisper a warning that evil sometimes wears a smile, and vigilance is the thin line between life and loss.